Yeah, now to those very disturbing reports from the Associated Press saying up to 400 ISIS fighters are currently in Europe and ready to attack. This coming, of course, on the heels of the Brussels bombings, which mark the third large-scale terror attack in Europe in just the past 15 months. Let's talk now with Terry Turchi, former Deputy Assistant Director of the Counterterrorism Division of the FBI. So we have some experts assuring us that U.S. security is much tighter than Europe and that our screening of refugees is much more stringent, and we should not worry that what's happening there will happen here. But is it really possible to stop 100% of these plots?
Well, no, Patty Ann, it's not. And we were saying kind of the same thing before 9/11. We were saying there are no credible threats to the homeland. And we found out that we didn't know as much as we thought we knew. The problem is, just because it hasn't happened here to the scale that we're now seeing in Brussels, excuse me, and across Europe, doesn't mean it's not going to be happening and that it's not coming our way. We've been fortunate. We're protected by geography, by our borders, by good neighbors to the north and south traditionally, by the oceans, by a very unique law enforcement community type of relationship all over the country. But there will reach a point when that's just not enough. And as we've talked about before on this show and other shows, when you allow ISIS and you allow other terrorist groups to essentially be beyond your reach because you failed to take the fight to them, then eventually the fight's going to be right here in your own front and backyard. And I would never want to come out anymore and say that it can't happen here because unfortunately it has happened here already. And it may very well, and in fact, I think it's going to happen here again.
Well, and regarding our own backyard, it is difficult to predict who is going to become radicalized. Michael Chertoff on America's Newsroom just earlier this week said there's really no good way to identify someone's risk of committing terrorism based on their religion or their ethnicity. Let's listen to him.
If you look historically back at people who carried out terrorist attacks in the U.S., many of them didn't start out as Muslims. They looked just like everybody else, you know, who was born as a Catholic or a Christian or whatever. And the idea that you can identify people who are at risk based upon their religion or the way they look is completely fallacious. It's like going after cancer with a meat axe instead of a scalpel.
So how do we identify them?
Well, first of all, we count on a long tradition, once again, of law enforcement and being involved with the community. The front line are the police. They know what's going on in neighborhoods. They know the people who live there. They know something that looks normal from something that doesn't. So we have to strengthen that relationship as it pertains to between the police and, say, the federal government. FBI agents and agents of other federal entities work all day long to do just that. And so that's one thing. We have to keep our eyes and ears open. The other thing we have to remember is that many times our politicians get really carried away in a lot of rhetoric, and they can become a bigger problem than what we're already facing with the terrorists, because they can actually do damage to the ability of people out in the community to knock on doors and get information. At the end of the day, it still makes me kind of just get chills to hear some people say that we ought to really seriously consider torture and waterboarding and things like this. And I'll be very honest. I kind of think I'll probably vote for Donald Trump. But I wish someone who's advising him would simply sit down and tell him you need to pull in these people that are telling you that the torture is okay and that it's effective and that it works and that it's going to help us in the long run in the war on terror. I wish they'd tell him that's not right and you should call in the people who are advising you that and simply tell them they're fired. That is not a good idea. And equally on the other side, the kind of things that the president is doing, the image of the president of the United States sitting next to a thug who calls himself the president of Cuba on a day that all these things were happening in Brussels is just abysmal. When there's a widow sitting in New Jersey whose husband was killed by a terrorist who's been given refuge by the Cuban government, along with many others. We've got to get past these kind of images and these kinds of ideas from these politicians.
Point well taken. All right, Terry Turchi, thank you so much for joining us.